1,400 pages. How long can it take?
Yes. This is about buildings and cities.
I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Gingell. This is SMLXL.
Yeah, we might only do S, or possibly a bit of S and a bit of M. It's by Koolhaas, and it's about the work of OMA. And it's a unique piece of architectural publishing, and also, like an absolutely iconic bit of 90s media.
Massive bit of zeitgeistism.
Yeah, it's incredibly 90s. Like anyone, I think, who's been an architecture student will have come into contact with it at some point. It is...
Well, I had a question about that.
Yeah.
Do you think the kids know about it?
Yeah, I suspect so. It's an interesting, and to use a Koolhaas word, paradoxical piece of architectural monography, because at one level, and it says this on the back, and it says it in the introduction as well, it's a book which sets out to disrupt the kind of false closure of the normal, architectural monograph, the normal way in which architectural design is presented as coherent, conclusive, a sort of story of ideas, which lead from kind of the early parts of projects all the way through to the end, and instead to reveal its actual reality as Koolhaas calls it, a chaotic adventure. Yeah, in some way to kind of break apart the myths and bring the whole thing low. But paradoxically, is also the most successful bit of charismatic hero formation in architectural monograph form, probably since the Second World War.
I'd say there's two in the 20th century.
Yeah.
There's Towards a New Architecture by Le Corbusier.
And there's this one.
And there's this, and they're completely different.
Yeah, and we're going to do...
That's about creating the image of an architect, as in that's what I mean in the context of it.
Architecture is a hazardous mixture of omnipotence and impotence. Ostensibly involved in shaping the world, for their thoughts to be mobilised, architects depend on the provocations of others, clients, individual or institutional. Therefore, incoherence, or more precisely, randomness, is the underlying structure of all architects' careers. They are confronted with an arbitrary sequence of demands with parameters they did not establish in countries they hardly know about issues they are only dimly aware of. Expected to deal with problems that have proved intractable to brains vastly superior to their own. Architecture is by definition a chaotic adventure. Coherence imposed on an architect's work is either cosmetic or the result of self-censorship. SMLXL organises architectural material according to size. There is no connective tissue. And then it goes on to talking about restoring a kind of honesty and clarity to the relationship between architect and public. Well, we'll see about that. I'm not sure that it's enormously to its detriment if that turns out not to be true, but it's useful to have that as the kind of thesis statement. Anyway, what did you want to say about it?
I wanted to describe what the book is like as a physical object.
Yeah. It's large.
It's large. It's certainly in the range of the sizes of the Bible that you get on the lectern of a church. Not like the little convenient Bible that you have on the bookshelf. It's got a similar number of pages as well, although an awful lot less words. It's silver. It's got huge letters, SMLXL. It kind of reads like a slab.
Monotype grotesque is the font.
Yeah. It has a single colour on the front, originally yellow. Yes. Highlighting Rem Koolhaas's name to make him seem very special.
Yeah. In the first edition, it's yellow, and in the second edition, it's orange for, the second. And then for the plebs, in subsequent editions, it's blue.
I can remember you getting that, and it went into the wheel of your bicycle and chewed up the side of it.
Yeah, that's why it's got this little... on the way home, the sheer weight of it caused the bag I was carrying to deform, and it rubbed on the wheel of the bicycle all the way home.
Yeah. Did you do that in first year? Why can I remember that?
Yeah, I think it must have been.
Yeah, it was. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We studied together for 1 year.
That was enough.
Yes. Anyway, inside, it is the things that he said it is. It's a huge book. One of the ways in which it resists the normal business of an architectural monograph is normally they try and present at least what the architect thinks or wants to show it to be about in a clear way. So in Towards a New Architecture, Le Corbusier is trying to make a small and cohesive point about what he thinks is good architecture or the future should be like.
Yeah. How technology is going to change architecture.
And you're meant to be able to understand it reasonably, straightforwardly, or at least the convention is to try and make the work understandable. In this book, a lot has gone into making it hard to understand.
Yeah. No, it's much more of a kind of exhilarating fever dream, isn't it? It's not...
Yeah, sort of. And we can go through... Are you okay to go through like some basic things about how the book is?
Yeah, let's say some basic things about the book.
It starts with a series of graphs set against photographs from the office, and they recount the history of the office statistically in workforce and things like that.
Yeah, I think these are the graphs that you could get out of like mid-90s Excel, aren't they?
I guess so. I think it might be more swanky than Excel, but yes.
There's like 3D line graphs and things, all very cool. This is very much in the same kind of like visual culture world as those like cool Windows 95 screensavers and things.
Yeah.
The one that goes around like an endless labyrinth. And
I think we can describe what all the things are like.
Yeah.
And then there's a page where it says SMLXL, black on white, very large, like the lettering at the beginning of Rocky.
Yeah.
Like huge things scrolling across the screen. And then there's the credits, very large, an introduction. And when the introduction, something else begins, which is on the left-hand side, all the way through the book, where there isn't something else there, there is an alphabetical list of quotations, which are not cited until the end, which are fairly arbitrary. And we will deal with examining that in detail in a bonus for those of you who are really interested.
Yes, the stealth essay of the kind of dictionary.
And it does sort of have content, but it's also deliberately cool and distracting and hard to tell what that's about. And in there's also images. And then it just gets into the business. And it's a mixture of, he says, organised by scale. And that's not quite true. It's not organised really hierarchically on any coherent basis. Is something like scale. So it mashes together projects, essays, real built things and more speculative things without chronology from 20 years, approximately on scale. The projects are presented with some text, drawings, and then whole page images, which may interspersed with images that are not really strictly to do with anything, just sort of photographs from the news or provocative things. There's various photographs of real or fictional violence. There's a few bits of pornography, art as well.
Just to keep you engaged.
Yeah. And landscape.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some of which are meant to be sort of provocative. Whole page sort of doodles. There's blocks of essays. There's bits of things that seem quite ephemeral, like pages of scribbled notes from a structural engineer.
Yeah.
And so on. And it goes through that. And then at the end, there's a series of kind of useful, well, not quite at the end, sort of in the middle at the end to make it kind of hard to find. There's a chronology.
Yeah.
There's credits. There's the explanation for, or at least what the things on the left-hand side are. Is there some other... There's the photo credits and things like that. Basically some stuff that is kind of pointing towards being a key to some of the information, which is conveniently held. And then after that, there's a whole load of...
There's another project.
And
then there's a big picture of Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, the back cover. Clip from a newspaper.
Yeah.
And then it ends. We can describe the effect of this, but it's a very capacious container.
Yeah. All the projects are different. So there are kind of broad strategies they adopt for different projects, but each of them is its own little world of graphic design. And sometimes the presentation is extremely lengthy, even over lengthy, almost like a mini book in its own right. And sometimes it is incredibly kind of truncated or obfuscated. But I think it's good to just mention...
There is a project which wasn't built but was developed to quite a great extent and worked on, which is represented by a 3D CAD perspective of some trusses.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the entire presentation of the project.
I think we should try and...
Overall, it is an assault of style on meaning.
Yeah.
And it's very stylish and cool.
Yeah, I would say like a couple of things about its significance. It's incredibly 90s. It's like an incredibly 90s piece of media. It's a brilliant piece of graphic design, like graphic and typographical design. Like it's like a very, very successful combination of all of these different types of media and type and photography and everything to create, this real like assault on the senses. It's a sort of super montage of information on top of information. It's very much its own little hyper-intensified sort of slice through a very distinct contemporary moment, which I think is now increasingly distant and quite interesting to visit. The 90s is a long time ago. This is very much of that moment.
I feel that it's an interesting moment to attack this book, which was so famous when we were young, and isn't yet old enough, I think, to be really reconsidered or really evaluated.
Yeah.
Rem Koolhaas is still around.
Yeah, still working.
His age is exactly between the incoming and outgoing presidents of the United States. I say that because there are people whose age has been discussed a great deal.
Yeah.
He's part of that generation, although always seemed to be looking forward in a way and sort of projecting younger. This work, which comes across as something young and cool, was actually done when he was in his early 50s.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't read like that. So this is before reconsideration, I think, in general culture, and after hype.
Yeah, we're early to the party, which is, it's a good place to be. Yeah, the book begins with, this is like just the first of many provocations, is to show how much money the studio is actually making or not making. One of the many things that's like decorously left out of the story of architectural practice is what it's actually like in how it's normally presented to an external public. Is what it's actually like as a business, and what the graphs reveal is not very good.
They never made any money, but
No.
I think that's also if you're running a business with no aim of making money, you may well succeed in never making any money.
Yeah.
There is the second graph. The first graph is workforce, which illustrates that there was a small workforce through the 1970s, and then through the 1980s, it grew dramatically. And then in the early 90s, it began to collapse. The second graph shows a similar curve with income and expenditure, which are two lines without really any gap between them.
Yeah. They have...
Which means that any architecture practice that doesn't make a profit will go bankrupt.
Eventually.
Yeah.
And they did.
And they did go
shortly
bankrupt.
after the publication of the book.
You need to... This is a point not to do with this book.
Yeah.
But I encountered a notion that it was sort of wrong to make a profit.
Yeah.
Or resistance that, like, profits result from not being fair. And that doesn't work.
No. If you have a business...
It has to actually make money.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make money net, it's going to go. Obvious
Yeah.
point. And there are various other ones. And in the background, there's lively pictures of the office, which are fun on a couple of axes. One, they show the process and bits of projects in the background, but also for now they show bits of 90s culture, which is kind of fun. One of them's got a big foam model in the foreground and a drawing desk with one of those drawing machines that you can move all sorts of parallel motions on.
Yeah.
Which has got the Lille Expo in it. Bit of breakfast in another one. Stacks of foam seems to have been very popular in this office.
Yeah, it's blue foam. They're very much a blue foam office. And
then we hit SMLXL.
Yeah.
A index at the beginning, or at least a sort of list of things which describes what it calls all the things. By that I mean Exodus, Voluntary Prisons of Architecture, a final project, but also things like learning Japanese, poem. Well, kind of. It's more like description of what...
A housing project in Fukuoka.
It's more like a housing project in Fukuoka.
Yes, obstacles, yeah.
Imagine nothingness, text, but other texts are called things like bedtime story, meditation.
Yeah.
So sometimes he chooses to say passion play, epitaph.
Yeah.
Then there's a big acknowledgement. I think Rem Koolhaas is both good and bad at giving credit to the collaborative nature of his work. He knows it's completely collaborative. He says it. He celebrates the collaborative quality of architecture.
Yeah.
But is also a successful and powerful ego, which successful architects almost need to be. And then it says foreplay in big words, which gives you another indication of the sort of thing we're in for.
Yeah. Which is that's a project that we've already talked about on another episode, his this kind of voluntary prisoners competition. And which gets another outing. Delirious New York gets a kind of outing. We get these kind of black and white photographs of a slightly worn first edition with a sentence running over the top in like bright orange that's
Hard to read,
hard to
deliberately
read, but I
so.
might read it out anyway because it's worth thinking about what it means. The permanence of even the most frivolous item of architecture and the instability of the metropolis are incompatible. In this conflict, the metropolis is, by definition, the victor. In its pervasive reality, architecture is reduced to the status of a plaything, tolerated as decor for the illusions of history and memory. In Manhattan, this paradox is resolved in a brilliant way through the development of a mutant architecture that combines the aura of monumentality with the performance of instability. Its interiors accommodate compositions of program and activity that change constantly and independently of each other without affecting what is called, with accidental profundity, the envelope. The genius of Manhattan is the simplicity of this divorce between appearance and performance. It keeps the illusion of architecture intact while surrendering wholeheartedly to the needs of the metropolis. This architecture relates to the forces of the Großstadt, which just means metropolis, like a surfer to the waves.
Which is a quote, I'm pretty sure. I remember that being in Delirious New York. And what is included is only the propositional appendix.
Yeah.
So it shows the original front cover. All this is in black and white. I think the book was originally published in colour. And what that shows, one thing that shows, is that the edition that we've got now is really quite different. And actually, I would say graphically less good
Yeah.
than the original. And
Yeah.
someone should publish a facsimile of the original, please.
Yeah. They made all the pictures much smaller for some reason.
And the layout less good, and it's more comprehensible. And they've also, I think, possibly even excluded some of the pictures.
Yeah. What does the sentence mean, or what does the paragraph mean?
You read it quite quickly.
Yeah.
I had thought of it.
I would say what it's about is it's no good fighting against the city and against capitalism. Architects shouldn't kind of set themselves up as being in ethical kind of opposition to the state of the world, because ultimately they live in a society. They live in an economy. What you really need to do is kind of fully inhabit the world, fully be part of it, and then sort of somehow, like Neo at the end of the Matrix, like sort of swoosh up on this pure kind of wave of your own creativity, and nevertheless create something magical out of the kind of inherent like and necessarily destructive energy which you're surrounded by. And I think that that's basically, this is the sort of essence of like Koolhaasian sort of charisma, is like both to be kind of critically distanced from the world and also like wholly a part of it and wholly kind of borne along on its energy. Like
It's kind of like Bismarck, right? You can't.
Is it?
You can't make history. You can only catch the coattails of it as it passes.
Oh, okay.
And
yes.
attempt to manipulate. It's a quote like that, isn't it?
Yeah. That sounds like it. Yeah.
And that spirit is an ongoing part of the sort of philosophy and presentation of Rem Koolhaas.
Yeah.
And at one level, it seems very reasonable, and opposition to it seems daft.
Yeah.
And in a way, he's saying, all of the schools of thought of my peers
Yeah.
are canards,
Yeah.
shouting into the storm.
Yeah.
They're saying that what they see is wrong and that they will change it. Really, what you should do is take what it is and steer it slightly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean...
Well, is that... yes and no?
Yeah. But I mean, this is something just to prefigure what we're going to talk about. Like a lot of smart people, a lot of Koolhaas's big ideas are formed on the anvil of other people's bad ideas. And they're like, very often when we're reading the essays, they're like a bit later.
Or even on the anvil of of opposition to other people's good ideas.
Well, yes, okay. I'm just, I'm ventriloquizing. Obviously, they would be bad, otherwise why would you criticize them? Like when you're reading the essays, they're often like quite disparate and there are different bits floating around, and what brings them into focus is when you realize like, oh yeah, this is the sort of mirror image of something else that was floating around in the zeitgeist at the time, and when you kind of put it together, you can see suddenly what its kind of generative parts are. I think we should just lurch into the explication of the bits.
Yeah,
I think
we can go through it, and then the themes will emerge as we do.
Let's start small. You immediately get like a bit of a picture of how this is gonna work and how this is gonna differ from a kind of conventional architectural monography. So we've got a few at the start which I think are not really worth talking about in any detail. There's an exhibition, a contribution to an exhibition at the Triennale in Milan that they did, which is a kind of historical fantasy about Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona pavilion, which I think at that point, had it yet been reconstructed at that point in the 80s? I'm not sure whether it had or not. It was originally built around the 1930-ish, I think, deconstructed, and then was rebuilt at some point in the late 20th century and is now there again.
What the presentation of the book has is tinted black and white backgrounds, inverted in that example, although not all of them.
Not all of them, yeah.
In the background of bits of the Barcelona pavilion or things like it, and in the foreground a series of images that are not strictly related to anything.
Yeah.
Except they're sort of political. Some of them are kind of in some ways connected.
The idea is it's a story of the pavilion and its materials, but large parts of it are just made up. They're kind of a fantasy about, where its marbles get taken away and get used in kind of other contexts during...
And the reason I was talking about the presentation is because it doesn't show what the exhibition was like.
No.
It also doesn't show what the Barcelona pavilion was like.
No.
Or his take on the Barcelona pavilion.
No.
It doesn't explain what the images it's showing are.
No. But the spreads...
It just puts things next to each other in opposition.
The spreads are rather lovely bits of graphic design, though. They look good. I kind of suspect that some of these pictures might have been things in the exhibition.
Some of them, I'm pretty sure.
That probably was a bit of the exhibition, this one with a funny column on it.
Absolutely.
Or maybe this other close-up was as well. Often in the presentation of the projects, the bits which are completely excluded are the long view where you can see the whole thing. Many of the projects are shown to us entirely as a series of close-ups. So,
and it seems to be very much about vibes.
Yeah, kind of immersive, atmospheric, but withholding of kind of explanation, this seems to be one of the manoeuvres. There's a little house project.
Yeah, well, there's a little essay about Mies van der Rohe, which we don't need to go into.
There's a little house project, which is like a little house on 2 levels for some friends, and it's which
looks like a international modernist house, except with Koolhaas detailing, which in this case is crinkly tin.
Yeah.
And
yes.
thick profiled
sort of aluminium windows and things. But this kind of establishes one of the ways in which projects are going to be shown, which is a big emphasis on photography. The photography's got a guy called Hans Verleman. I think in general the book is like quite an advert for film photography. He does the type of photography is mostly colour, mostly like a sort of highly saturated, slightly grainy colour, which generally sort of magic hour.
Kind of greasy, kind of darker than that. Kind of darker than magic hour mostly. Kind of
dusky.
Dusky or nighttime. The colour palette is cold and slightly greasy, greeny, grey, bluey often.
Yeah, like still very cyany skies sometimes. Lots of reflections. And they feel like quite cinematographic. Like there are some of them which have a bit of the coloration and kind of like finesse of sort of 70s auteur film or something like that. Like I think that's probably one of the things that he likes about it. And then
actually, most of the book, probably 80% of it, is black and white, which in this period would have been an economic concern, particularly for a book this big.
Yeah. And then here we've got sort of classic things. So we've got slight titillation, naked person behind a frosted glass screen. We've got one of...
the naked people are always women.
Yeah. We've got one of these, what Bruce Mal calls world images. They're like things from news media. In this case, a big building with the facade blown up, which I haven't quite been able to work out which one it is. But...
Well, I think it's the old HSBC building in the city. That in the corner is NatWest Tower.
Okay, so this is a post-IRA bombing.
This is an IRA bombing, and it's turned sideways. There's sort of images of real violence which are used as graphics, which
Yeah.
I think is to be provocative, really.
Yeah. And then you've got like a nice photo of the facade, like quite cropped in, lovely sky reflections. You like a bit of kind of intriguing but basically incomprehensible sort of view into the interior somewhere. Dictionary down the side with a big kind of floating photo of a Christo project.
Yeah.
You know, here's the kind of classic sort of scrapbooky.
Yeah.
Of,
This
feeling.
this is cable TV channel flicking.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
like MTV.
So anyway, those aren't projects which aren't that interesting to talk about, but this one is interesting to talk about. This is their Fukuoka housing project, and this one is treated at some length, and it starts with what is the way that he generally wants to introduce all of the projects, which is a kind of an aerial photo, in this case through an absolutely inscrutable
Mist.
haze.
Yeah. Of somewhere which is nowhere near anything to
How
do with
can
the
you
project.
tell where it's near? Oh, is that Fuji?
Well, that's Mount Fuji in
Oh,
the background,
okay,
which
so
is
that's-
in the
that's-
middle of Japan,
so that's-
and Fukuoka is at the end of Japan.
Yeah, so that is a different bit of Japan, but there you go. And like, what are the aerials trying to say? They're. I think he's really.
Well, in this case, it's saying this is the sort of urban condition,
Look
which
at-
is there's a messy bit of scrappy city, and then there's a barren waste site with a big arrow pointing to it, saying project goes here.
Yeah, here's the sea. Here's the infrastructure. Here's all of these. Here's all this building. Here's all this stuff. I mean, you know, one of his kind of theses on the city is like, it's a big mess.
Yeah.
and we've got to try and love it.
We already have been shown some projects completely out of context.
Yeah.
And now we're demonstrating it's completely out of chronology because this is really late.
Yeah,
This is a project from the 90s,
yeah,
which is almost at the end
yeah.
of the
kind of
period.
Yeah. So it's a development of 23 houses, I think, and then 2 little blocks.
That might be right. It's this. One of them's got
1 extra, I think.
okay, sure, yeah,
Well,
and,
I think I'm
and some shops at the front. Yeah.
yeah, some sort of shops and stuff. And basically, it's like a hovering horizontal block, like a sort of, he calls it a socle, which is a sort of word for a kind of podium.
He uses that word a lot in this book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little piece of classical vocabulary that he's very attached to. But yeah, like a sort of, like, it's like there's a sort of podium of a building, but it's actually hovering at first floor level and it's kind of cut away underneath it. And the houses are mostly in that like hovering first floor level, which is black concrete, although some of them come down to the ground. Each of them is a little courtyard house. Their roof profiles are kind of joined together to create these sort of little kind of papery sculptural forms. And then at ground floor level, there are various manoeuvres going on, but which create a bit of shops, bit of offices, away into the underground parking, I think. And
A lot of void.
yeah, I've put in a couple of pics which are from the website, but not shown in the book because they allow you to see what the building is really like. So that's a model of one of the blocks, and you can see like the way in which it works together. It's like a sort of squarish block, slightly irregular, which has been divided into sort of 3x4 ish to create the
Yeah,
little
exactly
houses.
3x4.
And yeah, but the presentation in the book, you know, it becomes a big story about lots of things, but mostly about the kind of lost in translation-y story of being a foreigner in Japan. It has a diary that runs all the way through. It has sort of like bits of Japanese ephemera, including quite a lot of pornography. Yeah, and sort of more or less sort of droll, profound, or banal kind of observations about the process of going there and working in this context. And it is all quite engaging.
He really enjoys being compared. The architect compares him. So he's working with a local Japanese architect and developer. And the development is we're going to get a series of sawdust architects to do a series of developer housing.
Yeah.
I think the impetus was initiated just before the massive crash, and it managed to continue and get done.
Yeah.
Rather than get cancelled. And the local architect that he's working with compares his architectural design style to an automatic pitching machine.
Yes.
Which he enjoys, and which points possibly to some qualities we could get into later to do with the style.
There is quite a lot of that going on. I don't really know the story of Fukuoka, but it seems to have had, there's quite a lot of posts of sort of development around this time. There's a big Aldo Rossi project there.
It's quite cool. Cool facade.
Yeah.
Weird
Yeah, which
interior.
actually, I mean, Koolhaas himself talks about in the globalization essay, I think, at one point.
He does, yeah.
There are these little droll kind of moments. I like this one about meetings. We had been 6 times to Japan, each time for 7 days. Each day we had meetings, 25 people together from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. At each meeting, 200 to 400 points. Point number 1, please choose between 2 greys for the bathroom.
Well, people who... I've had a pretty modest contact with office architecture, but
Yeah.
yes, buff or satin?
Yeah.
Satin
Yes.
or semi-gloss?
But then the punchline, point number 113, the foundations don't work.
Yeah.
This inability to define hierarchy. What's this about? He says, Japanese inability to define hierarchy or deliberate scrambling to keep the foreigner on high alert.
And then he says that they all do the Japanese meetings now, and I don't believe him.
No, I don't believe it either.
I think it's a load of rot. And then he actually does provide quite a lot of information about the buildings and how they work, which at one level means you can actually work out how the project works. I don't think we should discuss this project at great length. A lot of maneuvers have gone on to make it sort of architecturally interesting. I'm not sure of the net result. The net result is that there's a lot of information you can read in the plans and sections about how the set of maneuvers he's done to create different like control views and things and lift the plan. I am agnostic about whether the net result of all of this cleverness would be good or mediocre, but it would at least be interesting. And he's also left all the plans labelled in Japanese so that you have to then go to a key to work out what the Japanese words mean.
They're incredibly minimally labelled, and I find them quite hard to read.
Yeah, but I did look at them a bit, and you can work out what the project's all about with them, even though it's relatively complicated. There is, unusually for this book, quite a lot of useful
but
information.
This is also like the classic approach. So we have kind of introduction, we've got some photos, we have this travelogue, which intersperses travelogue, Japanese porn and other ephemera, some black and white photos of the interiors of the completed project, and then we have like a massive info dump of a load of plans and loads of sections, rather unhelpfully labelled and very starkly black and white without any context. And then we have one picture of some Shinto priests blessing a site next to a motorway, and that's the end of the project.
Yep.
And it's, this is the kind of, this is the sort of slightly confrontational.
If you spend a lot of time with it and really chisel away at it, you can, with the information he's provided for this project, work out what it's about, how it would work. There's the information in this example, at least.
I recommend looking it up on their website, though, because they have slightly... often the things...
Although even the website is quite selectively edited.
Yeah, the website's very selective, but you can also see there are bits which are still in the canonical record of projects, which he's left out of the book, which are nearly always the things which show the overall project in a way where you can understand it as a kind of three-dimensional form.
Yes.
That's the thing which is nearly always excluded.
You can work out... When the book came out, you wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have had access to this. I don't know who may have had a website or not, but it wouldn't have been a way that people dealt with information.
No, you would have had to cross-reference it with the L. Crocus or something like that.
Something like that. But it would have been very difficult. He's kind of wanting you to only be able to understand it if you really, really, really work at it in a way that nearly everyone wouldn't. You can get it, but you've got to
Yeah.
First, you can see I'm really cool. And once you've got I'm really, really cool, then you can really work at it if you're good enough. And then you might be able to understand some basic things about this project, which are quite straightforward.
There's a little, there are very, Well, one of the ways of thinking about this is a little bit like, I'm not going to sing the chorus. You guys already know the words. Like that kind of
Yeah,
kind
it's
of thing.
it's cliquey.
Yeah.
You can either be a sort of elite. You can either be kind of elite and understand it, or you can be an acolyte already and sing the chorus.
Yeah, I've already got the edition of A+U 100 and something, which has got this project in. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah, and then on the surface, it's just really, really zeitgeisty.
Yeah,
which is both cool and quite a dick move.
Yeah, and then we get a project which only has 2 pages, which is the refurbishment of a hotel somewhere in the Alps, which is 2 photos as kind of very washed out full bleed background. One of the photo of the hotel perched far away on top of a hill in a big landscape, and one an extreme close up of some chairs on a terrace. And then there's like a much more much sparser kind of diary / travelogue with some absolutely tiny pictures, which are.
I mean, they're not literally thumbnailed, but they're about the size of the first joint of my thumb.
Yeah, that's one of the ways in which we're going to encounter projects.
Yep. He often does this to elide stuff he doesn't like.
Yeah, just thinks that things are kind of boring. And then we get one of the projects which is actually given like a really long treatment in S, which is the Villa Dall'Ava. Villa Dall'Ava, which is a house in Paris.
And he clearly quite likes this project.
Yeah.
Like, he quite likes Fukuoka, but you can tell he likes it.
Villa Dall'Ava.
Yeah, I don't know how to. I'm not going to.
In Saint-Cloud.
The business of where to draw the line of pronouncing foreign words is only going to end up with looking like a idiot.
Yeah.
You can tell. Here's something I thought you could tell he likes this project, because it starts, the first image of it. He does this like site aerial thing and blah blah blah, and then there's a kind of diary down the side, as we often have, of his musings. And it starts with the site at an angle with it cut out, going, I'm gonna show this in a really confrontational way. Yeah. And then the next picture is, I can't bear it. This is too cool. My work is too good. I'm going to show you the same thing anyway, and I'm just going to come pretend I haven't. Which is a picture where it shows you the project.
And it is a cool project. It's
this was referenced so much.
Yeah.
Especially these little thin columns at funny angles.
So this is an extremely like Euro 90s kind of house. The brief is there's a family with a grown-up daughter, and they want a little apartment for them, and they want one for her, and they also want various other things. They want a swimming pool on the roof. They want a roof terrace.
Well, initially she's meant to be an infant.
Yeah.
But
not for long.
Yeah.
Or they kind of want the option of that in the future. And it's basically these 2 like boxes which are connected. So it's a bit like I don't know how you describe it, like a little two kind of boxes with a sort of perpendicular bit in the middle, which contains the entrance to circulation, a swimming pool on the roof, and the kind of bottom and top bits are like bedroom accommodation. And and they're floating. They're 2 like floating first floor boxes, which are clad again in anodized, crinkly metal. And they've got strip windows. The front one is on these kind of wonky little thin columns in a manoeuvre later better associated with Will Alsop, who I kind of really did this to death. What can you kind of say about it? It's a cool house. There's a sort of story about how the form of it comes to some extent out of the kind of permissible zoning. There's obviously a relationship and to some extent kind of satire on Le Corbusier, who has some houses not that far away. There is a kind of fun story in the final design about construction, where there are some sort of little constructional jokes, like the upstairs balcony is actually fenced off with this kind of plastic orange netting that you get around construction sites as a kind of permanent feature.
Yeah, it's a really expensively built building with some really cheap stuff in it. Really cheap plywood. Yeah, it's got conspicuously Le Corbusier or international modernist details in some places, and then things that are very much not that. It's kind of...
The Pilottis have gone wonky. They're steel, and they've got the strip windows.
For someone who's like railing against sort of postmodernism in this book quite a lot, although often at a slight distance.
Yeah,
he does a lot of it.
He does. Yeah, well, that's the.
Or people railing against. He rails against deconstruction.
Yeah,
he thinks it's moronic, but he does quite a lot of it.
I can't remember. Someone's got a quotation about this is one of the things which Koolhaas's contemporaries found annoying about him was that he was against all of these things except when he did them. in
Yeah.
his own special way. And the presentation gets initially there's a sort of a kind of sparse like diary of the project, which recounts the kind of chaotic early stages of it and it going off the rails, and kind of classic things like them having to move in while it's still on site and things like that, which is actually extremely common. Then we kind of get straight into.
Have you ever worked on a house where someone hasn't
Well, that
done
didn't
that?
happen. That didn't happen. Yeah, no, no. I mean, I'm living on one now in a rather kind of polite way. And then we kind of get straight into the pictures. Lots and lots of full bleed pictures, and sometimes we have kind of multiple pictures on a page. Or we have like one where he's put in a little bit of Vermeer as some sort of aspirational
It's quite a good
thing.
bit of graphics, that layout, actually.
It's,
The colour work is
the
classy.
I think the photos are great. I mean, they're super of their time, but I think the book in general, I would say, is a real advert for film photography and digital publishing.
Yeah, this wouldn't really be possible. This work wouldn't be possible without whatever it was, Quark Express.
Probably like a Quark file that was testing the upper bounds of hard disk size in those days. But the best of the both of them. There are lots of like lovely reflections. There's a sort of a photo.
Well, that's not what the whole thing is about Quark. It's like InDesign, right? The files are tiny.
Oh no, I thought
It's
Quark
just
was embedded.
Is it?
Someone can correct us.
Yeah, it might be.
I thought
It's all embedded, is it? Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, oh dear. Sorry if I've calumniated good old Quark. Here's a classic sort of titillating photo with someone's naked feet sticking out of a bed shown in reflection in the right of the shot. Loads and loads of photos.
Lots of pictures. In addition to there being strategies to make it hard to understand, there are even more strategies to make the book bigger. He wanted this book to be enormous.
Yeah.
I think Koolhaas was quite driven, got a lot of stuff done, worked a lot.
He said he spent 7 months just working on the book.
And he's really wanting to show that there's a lot of stuff here. And so it's just got lots of pages. And where you could have illustrated this project with fewer images, he's used a lot of images, which don't necessarily add to your understanding of it very much.
I mean, this photo here you got someone in the swimming pool wearing a jumper and someone in the background wearing a kind of dressing gown visible through a window, which looks like a piece of kind of like music photography from a upmarket magazine in the 90s or something like that. You can see architects who are really influential often sort of invent a kind of model of celebrity that they want to be, or like a kind of, because it's not really totally clear what like a famous architect is meant to be like, and quite often when architects have become famous in a new way, they've also slightly appropriated like a model of celebrity from elsewhere in the firmament. Like Peter Eisenman very much sort of at times in his career is kind of channeling the image of the French theorist. Koolhaas at this point is like very much seems to be trying to be a kind of cool magazine guy.
It's funny, the pictures you've got on the slideshow, there's quite a difference to the book, which is that your phone, which you took them with,
no, these are with a camera, but
the camera, which you've taken them with, has color balanced them.
Yeah.
And it's also sort of
it's washed them out a bit.
The opposite. It's kind of punched them up quite a lot. Like,
well, I'm sorry about the violence.
Well, that's not bad. It's just that they make it look a lot more. They make it look a lot less grainy and washed out.
Yeah.
And smeary and funny colours than it appears in the book.
Yeah.
I don't know if the print's different in the editions.
Yeah, actually, it's gone much more contrasty in the dark areas.
Yeah, I mean, look. Also, look at this. The one in the slideshow makes it look quite tropical.
Yeah, this one has got a kind of heat haze in the original photo, which again has been. Oh dear, I've probably got some kind of setting on that I oughtn't to have. Rather than scanning stuff, I took photos of the book, partly because I couldn't face scanning it because it's so annoying to scan.
So big.
It's insanely annoying and difficult to scan.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
When he includes bits of all photographs.
Yeah. And but that means that they've all been photographed in the kind of weak, watery winter skylight in my upstairs room. So it's not it's not necessarily the best conditions. It also has drawings, which in this case are like quite small on the page, pseudo like construction drawings. They've been marked up in red pen, although the marking up is kind of director's commentary rather than actual sort of corrections.
When he presents this project in lectures, he likes to talk about the main decision. Like, the house just came together like nothing, whatever. I didn't really have to think about it. But mainly we were working on what line the garden path should take. Should it be wiggly?
Yeah.
And that's all marked up in here.
There's a big kind of something which he's very fond of, big internal ramp.
When we go through this book, and in the later episodes of this book, we'll talk about ramps and not level floors. But at this stage, it's still, or in this example, not stage, because this is quite late in its final incarnation, it feels very much like a Le Corbusian ramp. In the beginning of modernism, there's the promise of the ramp. The ramp is much more exciting than the staircase or the level floor. It points to a position that's about that way people move in three-dimensional space, and the movement is dynamic.
Which is the one? I can't remember any of the names of the villas now, but which the one with the internal ramp, which is the one where he also has the vision for the art collection where you...
La Roche.
Is it La Roche? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the one.
where you walk, where the ramp is actually somewhere to be.
Yeah.
As well. But there's
and...
a significant ramp in Savoie as well.
Yeah.
It just feels really modern, right? It's like something you might get in a machine, but you also have the excitement of moving in 3 dimensions. It feels like a motorway.
Yeah.
But there are some obvious reasons why most of the time not level floors for the accommodation of a building is a bit of a dead end.
And then it has this funny little postscript, which is like, they lived happily ever after. One day they looked out the window and 30 people were standing outside looking in, which is, the fate of people who build a great bit of architecture as their private residence.
They said they wanted a masterpiece in it, and that's what you're going to get. I mean, you don't do that by accident, do you?
Yes, indeed. It does look like a very cool house, and it's just the materiality is just very 90s, isn't it? This kind of like lightweight. There was a particular way that everyone was doing their windows at that time, wasn't there? Like relatively thick on and sort of flat on the outside glazing profiles. Yeah, like a kind of plasticky, either plasticky or kind of anodized, often with quite a lot of intermediate bars. Yeah, slightly soupy green glass.
Surfaces being flat. And having like a sort of flat cutout texture.
Yeah.
And
a bit of material that just runs to the edge and then you just see the flat edge of it and then it's sort of something else. None of the planes have any thickness.
Like paper.
Yeah.
Shiny and it's like the beginning of the computer, I think.
Yeah.
Computer aesthetic. The atmosphere should be very synthetic. Silver. Like the front of the book is silver.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nostalgia about the fashion of the era. At the moment, I notice.
Yeah, there is, yeah. And then at the end of S, which we might just talk about, we then suddenly get this burst of 3 essays together, 2 of which are technically in S and 1 of which is technically at the beginning of M, which are Imagining Nothingness, The Terrifying Beauty of the 20th Century, and Field Trip, which were written 2 in 1985 and 1 in 1993, just kind of immediately before doing this book, I guess. The essays sort of align with the different scales of the book in the sense that there's sometimes a theme or a concept that is the dominant one. Like L and XL, I feel like there's a kind of broad like thematic consistency. In S and M, and we kind of got this, and we've also got 1 or 2 other ones, it's a bit more various, and they deal quite a lot actually with his formation, the way in which he sort of has critically kind of formed himself against his contemporaries and the kind of charismatic figures of the preceding generations.
The essays and the writing in general is a real attack on everyone else, more or less.
So we could read a bit from the start of this. Who does not feel an acute nostalgia for the types who could, no more than 15 years ago, condemn, or was it liberate, after all, Whole areas of alleged urban desperation change entire destinies, speculate seriously on the future with diagrams of untenable absurdity, leave entire auditoriums panting over doodles left on the blackboard, manipulate politicians with their savage statistics, bow ties, the only external sign of their madness, for the time when there were still thinkers. So this is kind of...
Which is a description. There is only one bit of that which is not Rem Koolhaas, which is the bow tie. With him, it's like the turtleneck sweater, a la Steve Jobs.
But the thesis is like, we're no longer in an age of heroes. And I think it was true, like architects after the 60s had kind of become increasingly a bit sort of marginal. They were really in a kind of world of high art and prestige sort of culture, but there are sort of episodes in the history of OMA where people asked for a bit of help on a city quarter or whatever, but in general people are not really looking for new theses on how to
But do you think
design
they actually were asking for that in the 50s and 60s?
There were periods, yeah. I mean, in the immediate post-war, definitely there were. And then people kept talking about it for a while afterwards.
Well, people were doing the cities and people were using the architects. But I don't feel that there was... I think when you look backwards, time is telescoped down and the influence of thinkers pops out because it's clear. But I think at the time, it usually seems a lot more impotent. You're relying on the self-promotion of the architects in question or urban designers. And if we look back at the time that he was dealing with, I think it's no less true. In the post-war era in Europe, there were a lot of blown-up cities, and so there were a lot of plans for them.
Often to blow them up a bit more initially.
A lot more, yeah.
Yeah.
And that
finish the job.
Kind of social, economic, political movement is the thing that changed. And what he's describing is someone exactly like what he wants to be.
I mean, the essay is kind of cryptic. It talks about various things. It talks a bit about this project, this O.M. Unger's project for Berlin, where they were talking about dealing with what then was very much a shrinking city by kind of selectively demolishing all the nondescript bits and kind of concentrating it into an archipelago of characteristic urban fragments. Koolhaas himself had worked on that, I think.
Lots of these essays, which are very engaging to read.
Yeah.
There's no difficulty. His writing is very easy to go from one sentence to the next, and it's got a nice clip.
Yeah.
And it's argued with a real force, although where his voice is in that force is ambiguous. Like, is this something I'm arguing for? And when I say ambiguous, I don't mean that he's standing back from it. It's like sometimes it seems that he's arguing for it and sometimes not, and it sort of flips.
Yeah. Well, they're not aligned, are they? They're like the voice of the essays and the voice of the buildings are two linked but kind of semi-autonomous.
But the voice within the
practices.
essays, just within the works themselves,
Yeah.
sometimes is a remote commentary and sometimes is an argument for something.
He does occasionally do that. Yeah.
He will want to kind of flip between them. But then when you've read this nice prose, it's very difficult to work out what he's talking about quite a lot, as in what he means in particular.
Yeah, I wonder if this one originally was attached to something like a bit more obvious. Imagining nothingness is Pompeii, a city built with the absolute minimum of walls and roofs. The Manhattan Grid, Central Park, Broadacre City, the Guggenheim, Hilberseimer's Midwest, which is, I think, a project by Ludwig Hilberseimer for Chicago, which I don't know anything about. But it sort of ends up as this slightly cryptic kind of homage to vacuity in the metropolis. Big spaces, big empty things.
It's funny, isn't it? Because one of the themes going through the urbanism of here, he's still in favour of congestion.
Yeah.
And earlier on, he'd called himself an apostle of congestion. But now he's also in favour of void. These are some things he likes. He likes big motorways running through the city, chopping everything up. He likes big, open, blank spaces in the city. He likes density and specificity. He likes generic things. And he thinks that his peers are fools.
Yeah. Well, they probably are. I mean, you know what architects are like. So then the terrifying beauty of the 20th century is, well, it's about kind of modernism and modernist revisionism. First of all, the kind of gauche and often rather destructive optimism of modernism in the 20th century city. I mean, this is more about Europe than other places. Yeah, he talks about thoughtless modernity. Well, I mean, everyone knows what the redevelopment of these sorts of cities is like. Lots of slabs, lots of blocks, lots of motorways, lots of kind of accidental and slightly blasted spaces in between, lots of ugliness, and then this sort of swing which he'd witnessed in his peers and people probably slightly older than him back against that and towards a kind of revival of historicist sort of value and contextualism and things like that, which he satirizes rather enjoyably. He talks about, I mean, this is one where you can see he's talking a little bit more about kind of design practice. He's talking about working in Rotterdam. He satirizes people who like over-fixate on the existing context, both in the sense of, so when they're proposing something somewhere, both like over-endowing the things around with a kind of ideological charge. You know, like this modernism kind of represents the domination of kind of rationality or the kind of crushing of the human spirit or the kind of the rupture with the kind of organic historic vernacular or whatever it is. Just sort of thinking too much about all of that and then letting that kind of determine your response. And he kind of, even the most mediocre aspects are invested with a retroactive conceptual and ideological charge. And he says, like, a lot of stuff that you encounter in these cities kind of churned up by war, rebuilt by modernism, and now 30 years later and looking a bit shagged, like a lot of what you're encountering is just accidental, is just kind of someone's not very good pragmatism, and that it's much better not to overthink it. He sort of satirizes all the kind of contextualists as chasing the faintest hint of an idea with the obstinacy of a detective on a juicy case of adultery, which is like, you have to imagine in the kind of classic like deadpan accent. And then
which is definitely a
which is funny, like
disease. I mean, it's a disease more of student work than.
God, yeah. Fuck the context. It doesn't matter that much. Like,
well, it can matter a lot.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always. And most certainly, just because something's there, it doesn't matter. Actually, context matters a great deal, but it isn't. Not everything about the site. You can't latch onto something on the site and.
Yeah.
Go, this thing makes everything make sense. It's not, it's not like you can reconstruct the whole thing from anything examined to the point of destruction.
So anyway, he ends up with this kind of call for recognizing the objective potential of these sites and exploiting them in kind of whatever way without worrying too much about their kind of ideological charge. And also for kind of doing things which are big and simple.
From Koolhaas, known for simple manoeuvres.
Yeah, they're not exactly simple.
All his projects are highly convoluted.
But again, so here we're like encountering what are we on the mirror image of here? Like postmodern historicism, kind of new urbanism, and also Dutch structuralist kind of dogma in favour of breaking things down into like the smallest possible level, kind of trying to always bring...
In a later essay, he will literally list
the
things he's attacking.
Yeah, and I think that like the structuralists had been, they're the big sort of Team 10 generation there in the Netherlands. You know, they're people who are kind of like young and up and coming architects with big ideas in the early 1960s, and I think that they were still knocking around. And at one point, I think Koolhaas was teaching at Delft, and I think no doubt kind of rowed with a lot of the older generation.
And it's quite enjoyable to go liberate yourself from your neurotic concerns about the existing and do something big and bold. It's sort of what he's saying. A recurring theme, not always what he actually does.
Yeah.
Yes. So I contradict myself.
Yeah.
Very well. I could say multitudes. Part of the structure of the book, I think, is that it is chaotic and then a level of background layout and, putting clashing images together, which is added, allows the contradictory tones and expressions to sit alongside each other. Meaning that it's very, it's got a lot of capacity. You can hold a lot inside this book because it's so messy. When you collage, didn't do this after being a student, but when I would collage as a student, I'd put everything together, and then the images would have like different sort of resolutions and grains, and then you just put noise on top, and then blur the noise.
Yeah.
And he's putting all these different images and things that are not to do with anything, and this like strip of stuff down the side allows, I think, the contradictory aspects to be accommodated because they're not any more contradictory than the general and quite obviously deliberate tone. So there's something that he's doing with his writings is I'm going to sort of vehemently make a case that I'm not sure is quite right to see if it works.
Yeah.
And to provoke a response.
Yeah.
You know, if his method of thinking is I'm going to react against a proposition with a counter proposition, and then I guess look at that myself and see how it responds.
Yeah.
It's dialectic, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's like that thing, you don't have to debate people. You can just satirize them. Like, you can just make fun of them.
That is also debating them in a way.
Well, no, it's not. Like, you don't have to give your counter argument. We don't have to both have a thesis. I don't have to say what I think I should do instead. I could just make fun of you and make you look stupid. That's also like a way to do it. And
but he actually does put a lot of. He doesn't. You're not sure about how much he's committing to them, but he puts a lot of theses in this. Often ones that are quite absurd,
free floating. Yeah. Okay, and then there's one more, which is Field Trip. Which is an essay about the Berlin Wall. And this is really his kind of origin story as a student, characteristically kind of strange and provocative way to do it. Normally for a student, you would imagine them finding their identity as a designer through their main design project, through their kind of thesis design or something like that. But for Koolhaas, it's through this kind of measured drawing project that you had to do in the summer holidays, where you were expected to go and draw, a Palladian villa or something of that sort, and do proper plans and sections of it and bring them back. And he chooses to do the Berlin Wall as architecture. You can see that is at one level readable as a sort of slightly juvenile piece of provocation, but his story is that it turns out to be unexpectedly profound, and that you kind of he learns all kinds of things through this engagement with the Berlin Wall. The essay starts off with a little sketch of the various large and charismatic personalities who are floating around the AA at that time, including Peter Smithson, Cedric Price, Charlie Jenks, Alvin Boyarsky, his future partner, Elia Zengelis, Lewis Kahn, who I think was just there for a lecture. The essay is really the story of how he kind of got out from under them and all of their various kind of hobby horses and projects and got out on his own. And it's the Berlin Wall. Those kind of observations which are sort of obvious, but which are nevertheless like somewhat interesting. Like, the wall is actually, when you really think about it, around the free part of Berlin, not the unfree part. Like, it's the geography of East Germany was that there was this chunk of West Germany floating in the middle of it, which was a kind of enclave.
And actually, weirdly, it wasn't part of West Germany. It was occupied.
Yeah.
It was part of an ongoing, unending occupation of France, Britain, and America.
Yeah.
You could go there and not have to do your national service.
He charts like the history of and the development of the wall as a barrier, which does start off literally with like a line of soldiers preventing people from crossing the city one day, and then becomes a kind of barbed wire barrier, becomes a kind of breeze block barrier, and then, latterly, quite rapidly expands into this quite large minefield and free fire zone with a big wall on either side of it.
Yeah, the history is interesting. As a project, firstly I thought he went to architecture school having done other things for a few years and would have been a bit older than everyone and kind of stood back, would be more experienced and able to kind of better pull off a provocation. And also I think he'd gone into architecture school knowing that he wanted to be something and probably had a more coherent idea of what he wanted to become. There's two kind of tones, I think, in this. One of which is the Berlin Wall is clearly quite profound.
Yeah.
It was a great and terrible thing. He talks about the image of people being stuck, shot, dying on the top of the barbed wire.
Yeah.
Of this image dividing and of the city divided and its effect.
Poignant little moments of in the early days of the wall where the two halves of a wedding party are kind of waving to one another over the top of the barrier.
And that's all quite true. And it obviously is an enormous intervention.
Yeah.
And it's an intervention which is like architecture. It is an architectural intervention because it's a physical built thing. And it's obviously also political, principally. Architectural acts are often political acts. The architecture is often a tool of policy. And there's that tone which is smart, right, but it is also mixed with a tone which is juvenile and deliberately provocative. He's sort of enjoying. He finds it beautiful and funny.
Well, yeah, he talks about the beauty of the wall.
And even that is a statement which you could defend.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about it, about a kind of dreadful beauty. I don't know, there are some bits which are a bit like sort of weird zingers, which he then seems to have toned down a bit to make them less crass. Like at one point he sort of talks about like, here's the ultimate proof that less is more. It's like, it is the kind of undemonstrative nature of this big precast wall marching across the landscape.
There's a tone, and in fact it goes through the work, and it goes through his things, which is crass and juvenile.
But he has sort of toned it down. Like there could be a version of this project, and maybe it's in its original presentation it was like this, which could be like Bernard Shumi's posters about architecture, like these kind of writ large sort of provocations, and a lot of it he has a kind of obscure reference to Schinkel's Schloss Glienicke, which is a kind of early, very stripped back bit of classicism, which I take to be a reference to a kind of like a sort of a minimal.
But what else
expression.
is there?
Like
the Glienicke Bridge, which is the bridge where bought East Germans were returned to the West.
Oh, really? God.
You know, where the sort of exchange would occur and lots of Cold War stuff happens. What comes out of this project, I think chronologically, is before the Voluntary Prisoners of Architecture, which is crass in that it's like an archigram joke of torture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a kind of archigram version of the Berlin Wall, the voluntary prisoners.
But it depicts violence done against people, you know, it sort of depicts sort of war crime aesthetics and comedy, cartoon aesthetics together.
Yeah. I mean, I think archigram probably deserve a bit of that, you know, because I've got to burst their bubble somehow.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it is done as a joke as well.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, with Rem Koolhaas, there is a problem that it appears to be a real lack of humanity. You know, he likes congestion and all this sort of stuff, and likes all these people getting together, but you don't get a feeling that he has like a lot of heart, and there's not like a lot of. It's quite often clever and cold, and the way he talks about life is quite inhuman. But he does laugh.
Yeah.
There's sometimes that.
The laughter is humanising.
Yes, the cool mask will sometimes break, and he'll be finding things genuinely funny.
Yeah. The laughter is humanising. I think he just doesn't like all these kind of sanctimonious, self-mythologizing kind of buffoons, does he?
I don't think it's just
the weapon
that.
against them is kind of a kind of merciless, sort of rhetorical cruelty. But
but I don't think that's like the whole. I think it's genuinely. I think being able to eliminate the worrying too much about the human qualities allows for a greater intellectual freedom to explore sort of formal and special. Anyway, blah 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 blah. Yeah, the other thing about this this essay is it comes right at the end of the period of the chronology of this and addresses
the beginning.
The beginning.
Yeah, so it's looking back 20 years. Quite a lot had happened.
Well, we've now got to M. We've bridged the gap from S.
We've run out of time to record now, so we'll just have to do a bit of M in the next section. But if this ends up being the end of this episode, then thanks a lot for listening.
And I think that will probably be a good place.
Yeah.
I think shorter episodes is better episodes.
Yeah. I guess we'll paste some stuff from the book on our socials as normal. They're at @about_buildings on most platforms, or about-buildings, rather annoyingly, new.
I've
Speaking
been
of-
lurking on the new social media platform, which I've always internally thought of as Blueski.
Blueski,
and all the things are skis and sort of
Yeah.
doing everything with it, but it's Blue
Speaking
Sky.
of liberal enclaves,
Yeah.
we're on Blueski now, and we're it's about hyphen buildings on
Yeah.
Blueski because the underscore is not permitted. But yeah, you'll find us there. It's the same content on all the platforms, so just
Yeah.
go on whichever one you prefer.
I'm happy we're doing this work. I wasn't excited about SMLXL. I was revolted by it when I was younger. And I think I'm REM curious now.
Oh, are you? Okay.
But
I think I'm probably slightly REM jaded, but I'm happy to.
you
I'm
were REM acolyte early on.
I'm happy to talk about it. I definitely find it more interesting as like a piece of media now. I think I've got quite a lot to talk about there. And it's nice. The old about buildings method, where you have to read it all the way to the end, is kind of it's an ordeal, but it's
There's a trick with this book, though. It's actually, do you think SMLXL is longer than Delirious New York?
As in terms of words?
In terms of like amount of stuff. I'm not sure it really is.
I don't know. I think there is quite a lot in there. I realised reading it that I had never got to the end of XL before.
Yeah.
In all the time.
You were really...
Yeah.
Okay, can we just have a little reminisce about how you found this when you first encountered it? Because I can remember you being very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. Well, it is good. I mean, yeah, I loved the early projects, and I love the bits that we'll talk about in kind of M&L. There's some great projects. And I love the presentation. I think it is a really great and successful bit of graphic design. Yeah, I guess I fell under its spell a bit.
Yeah, but that was sort of...
Well, I was probably about 19 or something. So
Yeah.
Some time ago.
Have a think about it, because I've kind of...
Yeah, I mean, my relationship to discovering this book is sort of similar to Koolhaas's reminiscence of Peter Smithson in the Crit Room. It's a couple of decades ago now.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I've got anything as kind of worked out as he does to say about it.
Well, we're going to stop now.
Yeah.
And you can think about it.
Yes.
And we will have a pause of a few days.
Yeah.
And the release will probably have a much greater pause.
Yeah, they normally do. But yeah, thanks for listening, and see you on the next one.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.